On a quiet October evening in 2011, paramedics rushed to a home in Scarborough, a peaceful suburban neighborhood in Toronto, Canada. Inside that home, they found a young woman lying completely motionless in her bathtub. The bathwater surrounding her body hadn't been drained. Her husband stood nearby, visibly shaken, claiming he had just returned from an evening jog through the neighborhood to find her unresponsive in the water. She was 29 years old. She was 20 weeks pregnant with their child, and she would never take another breath. Her name was Anna Carissa Grandine, though everyone who knew and loved her simply called her Carissa. And this is her story. Anna Carissa Grandine grew up in a close-knit community centered entirely around faith and family. From her earliest years, she was deeply embedded in her church family, surrounded by people who watched her grow from an innocent child into a young woman with hopes, dreams, and aspirations for the future. One community leader would later tell reporters that he had known Carissa since she was a child. She wasn't merely a congregation member who showed up on Sundays. She was someone the entire community had helped raise, someone they genuinely cared about, someone whose bright presence consistently lifted the spirits of those around her. Her mother, Charito Darvin, also known as Maria, was a devoted and loving parent who maintained an incredibly close relationship with her daughter throughout her entire life. Her father lived thousands of miles away in the Philippines, separated by an ocean, but he remained deeply connected to Carissa through regular phone calls, heartfelt letters, and the occasional precious visit whenever circumstances allowed. Despite the vast geographical distance between them, the bond between father and daughter remained unbreakably strong, built on a foundation of love that transcended borders. As Carissa matured into adulthood, she carried with her all the values that had been carefully instilled during her upbringing: unwavering faith in God, deep commitment to family, trust in her community, and boundless hope for the future. By her late 20s, she had built what appeared to be a beautiful and fulfilling life, one that seemed to contain everything she had ever hoped for. She was married to Philip Grandine, a man who presented himself to the world as a devoted servant of God and a pillar of moral righteousness within their close-knit community. Philip worked as a part-time pastor at Innerdale Baptist Church in Toronto, a position that carried enormous trust and moral responsibility. He was the person congregation members turned to during their darkest and most difficult hours, the voice guiding them through challenging decisions, the moral compass pointing toward righteous living. He stood at the pulpit on Sundays, delivering passionate sermons about faith, commitment, honesty, and the importance of living according to God's sacred teachings. For Carissa, marrying a pastor must have seemed like an extraordinary blessing from above, a husband who had dedicated his entire life to serving God, to helping others navigate their spiritual journeys, to living with unwavering integrity and moral purpose. In her eyes, she had found a partner who shared her deepest values and beliefs, someone she could trust completely and without reservation, someone who would protect and cherish her for the rest of their lives together. But behind the closed doors of their Scarborough home, hidden from the congregation and the community that trusted him implicitly, a very different and far darker reality was beginning to take shape, one that would ultimately cost Carissa everything she had. At some point during their marriage, Philip Grandine began constructing a secret life that contradicted everything he publicly claimed to believe. While he delivered sermons about morality, fidelity, and the sacred bonds of marriage, he was engaged in an extramarital affair with a woman connected to his own church, a parishioner who likely sat in the pews listening to his sermons about righteousness. While he counseled couples about honesty and trust, he was consuming pornography in secret, indulging in the behaviors he publicly condemned from the pulpit. Philip Grandine was living two completely separate lives, maintaining a facade of piety while engaging in profound hypocrisy. Eventually, the affair came to light. The discovery must have been devastating for Carissa. The pastor she had married, believing he embodied sacred values, had been betraying her in the most intimate way possible. The consequences appeared severe. Philip stepped down from his pastoral duties, a public acknowledgement of his moral failings. The couple entered marriage counseling, attempting to repair what had been broken. Clear conditions were established for reconciliation. Philip had to end the affair permanently. He had to stop consuming pornography. A porn-blocking program was installed on their computer. From the outside, it might have appeared the Grandines were working through a difficult period. Carissa, believing in the redemptive power of forgiveness, gave her husband another chance. By October 2011, there was reason for optimism. Carissa was pregnant, 20 weeks along, safely past the most dangerous period of early pregnancy. She was carrying their child, a new life representing the possibility of healing and moving forward. But Philip Grandine had never truly changed. The affair had never actually ended. He had simply become more careful about hiding it. The pornography continued despite the blocking software. The conditions of reconciliation were nothing more than another layer of deception. According to evidence that would later emerge in court, Philip viewed his pregnant wife not as a blessing, but as an obstacle, a barrier between him and the double life he truly wanted. The prosecution would later argue that as Carissa's pregnancy progressed, Philip began formulating a plan to remove that obstacle permanently. Philip Grandine's second job provided him with exactly the means he needed. In addition to his pastoral work, Philip was employed as a nurse manager at a nursing home. This position gave him regular, unsupervised access to controlled medications, including benzodiazepines, powerful sedative drugs. One such medication was lorazepam, better known as Ativan. Lorazepam can cause significant drowsiness, mental confusion, impaired coordination, and memory problems. When combined with factors like warm bath water and physical exhaustion, the effects can become dangerous, even fatal. Carissa Grandine had never been prescribed lorazepam. There was no innocent explanation for why it would be in her body, yet approximately 3 days before her death, around October 14, 2011, something concerning happened. Carissa went to the hospital with troubling symptoms, unexplained sleepiness, confusion, and disorientation. Physicians took blood samples, but, with no reason to suspect anything sinister, didn't test for sedatives. Carissa was examined, monitored, and sent home when her condition stabilized. 3 days later, she would be dead. It was only after her death that those hospital blood samples were tested for additional substances. The results sent shockwaves through the investigation. Lorazepam was present 3 full days before she drowned. This wasn't an isolated incident. According to findings later established by Justice Faye McWatt, Philip Grandine had administered lorazepam to his wife on multiple occasions without her knowledge. The hospital visit wasn't the beginning of something sinister. It was evidence of an ongoing pattern of secret sedation. The judge made a critical observation that demolished the defense's theory. If Carissa had knowingly taken lorazepam herself, she would not have been confused about her symptoms. She would have known she had taken a sedative. The fact that she arrived at the hospital bewildered and unable to explain her symptoms pointed to one conclusion. Someone was drugging her without her knowledge. That someone had access to lorazepam through his job. That someone had motive. That someone was Philip Grandine. The evening of October 17, 2011, began much like any other evening in the Grandine household. There was nothing extraordinary to mark it as different, nothing to suggest that unspeakable tragedy was mere hours away. But this night would be anything but ordinary. Before dawn broke the next morning, a young woman and her unborn child would both be dead. According to telephone records that investigators would later obtain and carefully analyze, Philip Grandine spent a significant portion of that fateful evening on the phone with his mistress, the same woman the affair was supposed to have ended with months earlier during marriage counseling, the same forbidden relationship that the counseling sessions were specifically designed to repair, the same secret Philip had solemnly promised to abandon forever. Whatever sacred vows he had made, whatever heartfelt commitments he had offered to save his marriage, they had clearly been utterly meaningless from the very start. At some point during the evening, Carissa decided to take a bath. She was 20 weeks pregnant, likely experiencing the physical exhaustion and bodily discomfort common to the second trimester of pregnancy. A warm, relaxing bath would have seemed like a perfectly normal, reasonable way for a tired pregnant woman to unwind at the end of a long day. But Carissa was not in her normal physical or mental state that evening. Once again, lorazepam was coursing through her system, a powerful sedative she had never been prescribed by any physician, a drug she had absolutely no legitimate access to. Crown Prosecutor Donna Kelway would later paint a damning picture of exactly what Philip Grandine had done that night. She described his calculated actions in vivid, unforgettable terms. He was playing Russian roulette with her chances of having some kind of so-called accident. The image is chilling in its accuracy. Philip didn't need to physically hold Carissa's head underwater. He didn't need to leave any visible marks of violence on her body. He simply needed to render her helpless and place her in a situation where tragedy could unfold naturally, where an accident could occur that would conveniently free him from his marriage and all his unwanted responsibilities. What actually happened in that bathroom during the final moments of Carissa's life remains known only to Philip Grandine himself. No witnesses were present. No surveillance cameras captured the scene. But at some point during that evening, Carissa Grandine, sedated and significantly impaired by a drug her own husband had secretly administered, 20 weeks pregnant with their child, slipped beneath the surface of the warm bathwater and never came back up. When paramedics arrived at the Scarborough home in response to Philip's 911 call, they found a scene that immediately raised serious questions. Carissa was still lying in the bathtub exactly where she had drowned. The water surrounding her body had not been drained. A husband who claimed to have discovered his wife drowning and desperately tried to save her hadn't even bothered to empty the tub as part of his supposed rescue efforts. Despite the best efforts of the emergency medical team, Anna Carissa Grandine could not be revived. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Her unborn child, the baby she had been carrying for 20 weeks, the life she had been nurturing and dreaming about, died with her that night. Philip Grandine told the responding authorities a carefully crafted story designed to establish his innocence. He claimed he had been out jogging through the neighborhood that evening. He said he returned home from his run only to discover his wife unconscious and unresponsive in the bathtub. The investigators listened carefully to every word of his account. They noted all the details he provided. They closely observed his demeanor, and they didn't believe a single word of it. In the weeks following Carissa's death, the investigation gathered evidence that would systematically dismantle Philip's narrative. The autopsy confirmed Carissa had drowned, but toxicology raised red flags. Lorazepam was present, a drug she had never been prescribed. Investigators retrieved the blood samples from her hospital visit 3 days earlier. Lorazepam was there too. This was a pattern of sedation, not a single incident. Philip had access to lorazepam through his nursing home job. He had motive, the affair, the double life, the pregnancy binding him to a marriage he wanted to escape. Digital evidence added another damning layer. Investigators discovered computer searches related to lorazepam. Even more disturbing, they found searches for autopsy, suggesting Philip had researched what would happen to Carissa's body after death. Philip's alibi collapsed. Evidence showed he had been home, not jogging. Phone records revealed what he was doing while his wife lay dying, talking to his mistress. 6 months after Carissa's death, Philip Grandin was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Philip Grandin's first trial began in November 2014. The prosecution presented evidence of sedation, deception, and motive. The defense argued Carissa was depressed, had obtained lorazepam herself, and that her death was accident or suicide. On December 4, 2014, the jury delivered their verdict. They rejected first-degree murder, but also rejected the defense's theory. The verdict: guilty of manslaughter. The jury concluded Philip's reckless actions had caused his wife's death. He had created the dangerous conditions leading to her drowning. In January 2015, Philip was sentenced to approximately 15 years in prison. Justice, it seemed, had been served. But Philip wasn't finished. His legal team began preparing an appeal. On September 15, 2017, Philip received news that would force Carissa's family to relive their nightmare. The Ontario Court of Appeal granted a new trial. The appeals court found issues with how certain evidence had been presented. Legal technicalities had created grounds for overturning the verdict. For Carissa's loved ones, the news was devastating. They had endured one trial. Now they would do it all over again. Family friend Cliff McDowell spoke to reporters. "It's going to be difficult and stressful." The second trial began February 1, 2019, more than 7 years after Carissa's death. Crown prosecutor Donna Kelway laid out the evidence of Philip's double life, his access to sedatives, and his lies. "He was playing Russian roulette with her chances of having some kind of so-called accident," she told the jury. The defense continued arguing Carissa took lorazepam voluntarily, but the argument was increasingly difficult to sustain. On February 28, 2019, the jury returned their verdict, guilty of manslaughter. For the second time, Philip Grandin was found criminally responsible for his wife's death. The sentencing hearing in May 2019 finally gave Carissa's family a chance to speak. Her mother, Carito Darvin, addressed the court. "There must be a just punishment for this heinous act, as my daughter cries out for justice from her grave." Carissa's father had his statement read aloud. He described the journey to Toronto to bury his daughter. "I was so grieved and heartbroken on the way there that I became so dizzy and almost passed out." Deacon Robert Steeves spoke to the community's pain. "This has stolen my trust and faith in people." In November 2019, Justice Faye McWatt delivered her findings. She found Philip had researched and obtained lorazepam from his workplace. He had administered it to his wife without her knowledge. He had lied to police about his whereabouts. He had lied about his rescue attempts. Regarding those claimed rescue efforts, the judge was blunt. Had he truly intended to get his wife out of the bath, he would have been able to do so. She called his actions a pretense and a charade. On January 7, 2020, Justice McWatt sentenced Philip to 15 years imprisonment. But 3 days later, another twist emerged. An Ontario Court of Appeal justice granted Philip bail pending his appeal. Justice Benjamin Zarnett noted, "There is a ground of appeal that clearly surpasses the not frivolous standard." Philip Grandin walked out of prison while Carissa remained in her grave. The appeal was heard in 2022. Philip's attorneys argued there were problems with jury instructions and how computer evidence was admitted. On May 9, 2022, the Court of Appeal delivered its decision. Philip Grandine's appeal was dismissed. The court found no merit to his arguments and no basis to interfere with the conviction. Regarding the 15-year sentence, they called it fit and reasonable. Nearly 11 years after Carissa's death, after 2 trials and multiple appeals, the Canadian justice system delivered its final verdict. Anna Carissa Grandine should be alive today. She should have celebrated many more birthdays by now. Her child would be 13 years old enough to be starting middle school, developing their own unique personality, making friends, discovering their passions, building their own dreams for the future ahead. Instead, there are only memories, faded photographs, and a grief that will never fully heal. Carissa placed her complete trust in the person she should have been safest with, her husband, a pastor, a man who publicly dedicated his entire life to serving God and guiding others toward moral living. She trusted him enough to forgive his betrayal when she discovered the affair. She trusted him enough to try saving their marriage through counseling. She trusted him enough to believe his promises that he would change. She trusted him enough to carry his child inside her body. That sacred trust was weaponized against her in the cruelest and most devastating possible way. Philip didn't use violence in the traditional sense. He didn't leave marks or bruises that would immediately draw suspicion. Instead, he used his professional medical knowledge, his easy access to controlled medications through his nursing home job, and his wife's fundamental trust in him to create a situation where she would simply disappear from his life, where a convenient accident would free him to pursue the double life he valued more than his marriage vows, more than his pregnant wife, more than the child she was carrying. The prosecution called it Russian roulette with his wife's life. The judge called it a pretense and a charade. Carissa's grieving mother called it a heinous act that cries out for justice from the grave. Whatever words we use to describe what Philip Grandine did, we must remember one fundamental truth. A young woman lost her life because the person who stood before God and swore to love, honor, and protect her chose instead to betray her in the most final and irreversible way imaginable. Carissa Grandine deserves so much better than the fate she received. Her child, that innocent baby who never got to take a first breath, never got to see the world, never got to be held by grandparents who would have loved them unconditionally, deserved a chance at life. For Charito Darvin, there will always be an empty chair at family gatherings, always a birthday that passes with tears instead of celebration, always that moment of forgetting followed by crushing remembrance. For Carissa's father in the Philippines, there will always be the haunting memory of that devastating flight to Toronto, the physical manifestation of grief so profound it nearly knocked him unconscious. Some crimes leave wounds that time cannot fully heal. Some crimes remind us with terrible clarity that the people we trust most completely can sometimes be the most dangerous. Some crimes teach us the hardest lesson of all, that evil doesn't always announce itself with obvious warning signs. Sometimes it wears a pastor's collar, speaks in gentle and comforting tones, and waits patiently for the right moment to strike. This was one of those crimes. Rest in peace, Carissa. Rest in peace, little one. You will not be forgotten.